Everybody owns the land, but we can all experience it. And architecture should be like that. You experience it with all of our senses, our eyes, our fingers, our ears. Some 10 years after we left the library, and times changed in that city.
Together for the esteemed keynote speaker, architect Robert Greenwood, partner and director of Asia Pacific region, Snohetta.
I'm going to be talking mainly about people, because it's people that make architecture. I mean, without people in our buildings, they're just buildings and they're not architecture. We'll start though in Snøhetta, back in sunny Norway. As you can see, it's about the same amount of fog in Norway as there is in Delhi. And a quote that we often use that really, I think, says quite a lot on a number of levels. Snøhetta is a place nobody is from, but anyone can experience. And of course, we call it our mountain, Snøhetta. That's the Snøhetta mountain. But of course, we don't own it. But everyone can come and experience it. And I think we need to understand that even though we're building buildings and we think that we own the place, we don't own the land. The land, well, the land that belongs to everybody. Everybody owns the land. But we can all experience it. And architecture should be like that. No one person owns it. We all own it, we own it together, and we experience architecture. And we experience architecture together. This is Snøhetta. You can see the mountain in the background, but the people in the foreground are really Snøhetta. These are the Snøhettans, as we call ourselves. And once every 2 years, we all get together, brave the elements, and walk the mountain. And it's an opportunity for us to walk and talk about architecture. We started the company over 30 years ago as an architecture and landscape culture company. And I think that that's really important to us this day, today. We're obviously now more than just architecture and landscape, but landscape still, I think, is a key element of what we do. And I think that many of our buildings can be described as land architecture. Not that they are landscapes, but they evoke the feeling of landscape, the feeling of being in nature, even though they are man-made. The feeling that the building is bigger than itself. And our book, I think, is important. The title is important, Collective Intuition. Architecture is intuitive. But what we want to do is to do it together. It's a collective endeavor. It's not one person, one man, one woman. It's many people working together. So this idea that we can have a collective intuition can lead to what we really want to get to, which is chapter 2 in the book, collective ownership. That we all actually feel we own this building together. And key word being generosity. Generosity on many levels. Generosity on the level of the concept. The concept must allow for many interpretations, many possibilities. But also generosity in the process of creating the building, the process of creating the project, needs to open for many people to feel that they are involved in this project, that they own this project. I've just put in a few pictures of some buildings because I've realized I'm not going to show you many buildings today. I'm going to show you a lot of people. But this is where we started in Alexandria in Egypt over 30 years ago. And as you'll hear later on, I've just come back from Alexandria. I was there to celebrate the 21st year of the opening of the library. And what an opportunity to go back to this place 20 years later. More recently in Paris, the headquarters for Le Monde. Why is this important? It's important because of this space underneath, right underneath the Le Monde headquarters. They wanted to build a place for all of the citizens of Paris, an open space, a free space, and this was designed right after the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. A very bold move by a media company in Paris at that time. San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, a dance between the old Mario Botta building and our new building. Two dancing partners, very different. And then the Oslo Opera House, we'll talk more about that later. The outside, but also the inside, collaborating with many artists, and I should mention our collaborators here. This is Pei White, the Californian textile artist who has woven the stage curtain there. And of course, our first project in New York, the 9/11 Memorial Pavilion, which I think is a place where you can take part in the architecture. We talk, I think, a lot about placemaking, but I find it more meaningful to slice up the word, change it around, and making place for people. As I said at the start, our structures, our buildings are nothing without people. If there are no people to experience our buildings, then there will be no architecture. Architecture is something you experience. You don't just look at it. I don't think you can think a building. You have to experience a space. You experience it with all of our senses, our eyes, our fingers, our ears. Every sense we have is about this experience of space. And without people, it's not architecture. And the thing about designing and making space for people is they don't always do what you expect them to do. They don't always do what you want them to do. You can't actually prescribe how people will use your buildings and your spaces. This is obviously back in Alexandria, some 10 years after we left the library, and times changed in that city. And the spaces that we had created were suddenly used by many people for activities that we had not anticipated. But it's a place that they found meaningful. So meaningful that in the Arab Spring, which is where these photographs are taken, they even made a human fence around the library to protect it, to protect the books, to protect the culture that was inside. It's really quite ironic because when we completed the library 10 years before this, we built a beautiful plaza in front of the library, beautiful trees, beautiful benches, a place for people to relax in the city. And the director of the library thought it was such a beautiful place that we should build a big fence all around the plaza. We were fortunate enough to dissuade him from building the fence. And a little bit ironic that some years later, they built a human fence to protect the library. And of course, the Opera House in Oslo, which is really all about the people and the way they use the plaza. Opera has never really been a very popular endeavor in Norway. Norway is a social, democratic sort of a place. We don't like elitist institutions like the opera. We think they're snobbish. So making an opera that works in Oslo is all about bringing the people, the citizens, into that opera. Not necessarily into it, but onto it, all over, climbing all over, walking all over. There is always somebody walking on this roof, even if it's in the middle of winter, icy and cold, or in the night, or in the daytime, you will always find somebody on the roof. And because you can walk all over that roof, you actually feel like you own that roof. So back to this idea of generosity, collective ownership. The opera really embodies that. This is the entrance to the opera. These young girls don't know really that it's the entrance to the opera. They found their space where only they can go, and their mothers and their fathers can certainly not run after them. Their experience of the opera, very different to yours or mine. Or these young boys who are sliding on the slope of the floor, because the floor is not flat, of course. For them, this is the opera. It's a slide. It's fun. On the other side of the world, similar sort of space that allows people to create their own spaces within the building. This is the Ryerson Learning Center in Toronto. 4 or 5 floors of different spaces. It's a library with no books. It's a learning center with no rooms. And it's a place where the students themselves create their own spaces, how they want their learning spaces to be. Ones or twos, in groups, learning alone together. And it's this idea of shared experience, collective memory, and above all else, this idea that architecture is not theoretical. You don't think it, you experience it. On the now pedestrianized Times Square, people experience that space without the cars and the trucks. They don't think about it. They're just experiencing the space. In Austria, for Swarovski, we designed a number of buildings. This is the Play Tower. It's a beautiful object, but much more than being a beautiful object, it's a place where people feel beautiful in. And these guys, 2 of our architects in this case, experiencing that very differently, the vertical and the horizontal. Or these kids jumping up and down and experiencing, again, the space in their own way, taking their own vision of what architecture is back with them. Back in Ground Zero in Manhattan, are these people the spectators, or are they actually the spectacle themselves? And as I said, architecture is really all about experience. Can you touch it? Can you feel it? Can you hear it? Can you see it? You don't look at architecture, you walk through it, you walk in it, under it, and over it, and on it. You don't look and think at it. These girls are just loving running down the slope of the Opera House. They have wings to fly with. Don't tell me it's the same walking up. It's not. It's much nicer to run down. That's because of gravity. Gravity that's holding us down. If you walk up the roof, it's actually quite hard work. You really feel the gravity in your legs. You have to climb up the roof. And these people might be on the outside looking in, or are we on the outside looking out? I think she's on the inside looking in. So I'm going to take you, first of all, back in time, and we'll go back to a couple of these buildings, the Opera House and then Alexandria, because it's good to go back to buildings. Most architects, like myself, we design, build buildings, we come to the opening, we cut the ribbon, maybe we even light the lamp, and then we go away with our beautiful pictures and we never come back. It's good to come back, see how people actually use the building, and as you will see in a minute, talk to the people who are in the building and experiencing that building, hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I will say a couple of times per week actually, and I've never actually been to the opera before, but for me it's like a really nice place to just hang out and relax. It's you can say it's a meeting point, often where I hang out with friends and just relaxing in the weather and looking at the sea. So it's part of the city scene, kind of, yeah.
So he comes to the opera twice a week, but he's never been to the opera. I think that's wonderful. It's the idea of being a space that everyone owns, a space where everyone can come to, whether they have a ticket or whether they don't have a ticket.
Great. I feel great because it's a nice building on a nice place with a nice view, and it's...
Yeah, it's great. He feels great. I know what you're thinking. We're only talking to the people who like the building, and we've edited and censored it with the people who don't like the building. No, not at all. Everyone loves it.
First of all, to feel free and see around Oslo and the beautiful colors, because Oslo is a very busy city, so you can't see like the nature. So opera, when I'm sitting here, I can see the sea and the trees and the house, so to feel free.
She comes to the opera to feel free. And it's really interesting to study the opera and how people use that space. I think I could probably do a PhD in social anthropology just by studying how people sit together, how they react, how they use and interact with the space.
I think the building is one of the best buildings because I like the color, white color of the opera.
She likes the white color. Why? Because the white color is the perfect background for all of the color that everyone brings with themselves into the opera. They bring the color, the people bring the color. Now this surface is really quite an interesting surface. It's obviously man-made. It's actually made by artists, but it feels like nature. These different components that come together to make the surface, the terrain, the topography. It's not really a roof, it's not really a building, it's really a landscape. 30,000 different stones, they're all unique, and they go together to create this piece of ground, this piece of man-made landscape. Yes, it comes from the quarries of Carrara, and that was the most difficult decision we had in Oslo, was to choose on what was, after all, the National Opera House, to choose to use Italian stone for the roof. It was a big political debate. We went up to the parliament to decide, give us permission to use Italian stone in Norway. We have a lot of stone in Norway, if nothing else. Why did we use the Carrara marble? Well, she said it on the roof because it's so white. For her, it reminded her of stone. But for us who live in Oslo, and you think it's dark in Delhi in November, come to Oslo in November, it's really dark. But the roof lights up and shines. It's a piece of man-made nature, different stones, different techniques, feels like nature, feels bigger than itself. You can come here alone, you can come here with a few friends, you can walk the roof, have your picnic, take your dog there. It's quite pet friendly. Come with a lot of people, come with all of your friends, and if you didn't get a ticket, it doesn't matter. You can see it on the outside, feed the swans, fish your dinner, go skiing. If you come at this time of year, please join me, we can go skiing, or go swimming. Don't do it now, come later, next year. So, down back to Egypt, and this is now, as I said, 21 years since we left this building. There it sits in the harbor of Alexandria, and this is a city that has gone through, as you saw in the images earlier, all sorts of troubles and difficult times in the last 20 years since the library was built. And yet the library still stands there, serene in a way, in the middle of this city. The city is gradually crumbling, I'm afraid. It's not been a good time for Alexandria this last 20 years. So very interesting to come back, to talk to people about the building, about how they feel about the building, about how they feel the building has changed their perception of the city and their lives in the city. It's a pretty chaotic scene outside of the library, maybe not so unlike this city here. Carts, people, cars, trucks, fairly chaotic, and then glimpses of this little bubble, because it is a little bubble, an oasis in the middle of the city. Still, after 20 years, you come back and people have to stand in line to get into the library. There's this early morning. They've been queuing there to get into the library because they want to get the seat, they want to get a space. I think that's fantastic that you have to queue up to get into the library. The men on the one side, the women on the other side. It's a place to be seen, of course. It's a place to see, and then we can hear what Maher
أنا
has to
اسمي
say.
ماهر، عندي 16 سنة. أنا باجي المكتبة هنا من وأنا عندي 6 سنين. قضيت معظم وقتي طول الصيف طول ال10 سنين في المكتبة.
I think that's great. I didn't spend all my summer in the library. Maher does. As with the opera roof, people bring their own color to the building. You don't need to have too much color. We have a little bit of color in the roof, the green and the blue, that lets the cool daylight into the space. Egypt is a little hot, usually. And this space is really a wonderful space. Even after 20 years, coming back there, entering this space again, very emotional. It is one of those spaces that you really don't forget. It's inside, of course it's inside, but it feels like it's outside. And the columns of the trees and the canopy lets the light through. It is the biggest reading room in the world, the open reading room in the world. Interestingly enough, we're about to challenge that with another building I'll show you later. But it's a great space. It's a great library to be in. And yeah, there is no empty desk in the library. There are people of all shapes, sizes, ages. The girls, a lot of girls there. There are some guys there. He's sleeping. The girls are studying. That might explain a lot.
L'impression de cette bibliothèque, elle est vraiment impressionnante.
Ouais, elle est grande.
Ouais, elle est grande et puis les conditions d'études sont vraiment formidables.
Formidable. I think this guy has been here every day for the last 20 years since we were there last. And this is Sabrina, who is the deputy director of the library.
It's just a feeling when you set foot in the library, you feel so proud. And when somebody asks you, what do you do? And you say, I work in the Library of Alexandria, they go,
wow. I mean, I get tears in my eyes just listening to Sabrina.
And just basically having the library here, even with or without knowing about the background and everything, it's like a center where you can come to be and come to learn and come to mingle with a lot of people who have the same intellectual sort of thoughts in mind.
And of course, if you really want to know what people think about your building, well, they say you should talk to the taxi driver. No, you should talk to the gardener. So this is Ahmed, the gardener.
مكتبة اسكندرية جميلة ولطيفة والناس اللي ماسكينها أحسن وأحسن.
So I can't say it better than Ahmed. Times Square is a similar place that I think I could gather similar stories from. We should do that. Obviously, taking away the cars, bringing back the people, pedestrianizing the 5 blocks, going from this chaos, which looks a little bit like the chaos in the streets outside here, to a place that is for people. I don't have the interviews, but we'll just enjoy some of the pictures of some of the New Yorkers who are just enjoying being in a part of the city that they couldn't be in before because it was full of cars, full of buses. It was unsafe, it was polluted. They can now take their pets, sit on the benches if they really are benches. Kids come play on the ground. And all sorts of people from all over the globe, of course. It's one of those projects that's actually quite difficult to photograph because you can't usually see the architecture, which is the floor and the bench, because it's full of people walking, standing, sitting, lying down, whatever they do. Matching shoes with the dogs, sometimes big events. And of course, it pays off. There's less crime, there's less pollution, and the government gets more taxes. We should do more of it. Jump in focus and then back to some very small projects that are also for people, and back to Norway, which is where I am based, and a little project in the landscape at a little place way north in Norway called Trelviksosen. You can try and pronounce that afterwards, Trelviksosen. And it's one of those tourist spots in the north of Norway where you have driven all day, you want to park your car, have a picnic, have a cup of tea, look at the nature, let the kids run around. And our intervention there was really a very simple one. Out in the distance there, you've got the big mountain, Snøhetta. And then you have this little island in the middle of the bay. And of course, everyone wants to get to the island. So we made a magic path for them to get to the island. A series of stepping stones. Before we put the path there, everyone used to run across at low tide and really destroy the biodiversity that was on the seabed. So now, with the stepping stones, as you can see with the little snails who are now inhabiting the stepping stones, this biodiversity is coming back. If you come at high tide, you have to take your shoes off. In fact, if you come at high tide, it might look like you're walking on water. And people might wonder how on earth you got there, because there's no path. But of course, if you come at low tide, you see a different story. And there's just something very magical about nature, doing what nature does. The sea rises as the tide rises, and as if by magic, the path disappears. I love this project. Or in the Austrian Alps, just up from our office in Innsbruck, these series of, it's called Perspektivwegen in German, and it's a series of hangouts, little stops on the trail up the mountainside. Little places in nature that just take you a little bit further out from the hillside, accentuate your perception of nature. Here, lifting you up just a little bit more. Or here, just projecting you out from the valley side, out from the mountainside into the air. A little bit further out is this point of desire. You're on the mountain, the view's great, but you just want to be a little bit further out, bringing people up and above. So these are things from the past. I'll show you now some of the important projects that we're finishing in Asia, mainly. As I said, this is Beijing City Library, and they've been contacting the Guinness Book of Records because they're taking up the challenge of who is the biggest open library room in the world. Alexandria, I think they are at the moment. I think the Beijing City Library is going to be an even bigger open library reading room. It's about to be completed. It'll be open now in January next year. And as you can see, if you look inside, it's one big landscape on the inside. So instead of going to little rooms to find your book and your study place, you walk freely in the landscape, among the books, in an artificial, man-made landscape on the inside. So This is one of our renderings. I don't think anyone really believed that we would ever manage to do this. It's not a huge scale, but as you can see, we only have a few months left. They should open. They tell me they're going to open. And when they say they're going to open in China, they usually mean it. And here you can see part of this valley that runs right through the middle of the building. Two sides, you walk up on each side, find your books, find your study place, and you can read a book in a big room, a big landscape. It's bigger than itself. You can sit and focus in the long distance. We spend our time looking at phones and screens, not so much into books, but very rarely do we able now in this urban life we have to focus in the distance, use the long-sightedness that we have. This is in the bottom of the library. You see the valley on each side, the columns, and this canopy that allows the light to filter down into the reading room. So we think it's a little bit bigger than Alexandria, but we're taking this up with the Guinness Book of Records, and we'll see who's the biggest. As you can see, the cleaners are getting ready. I love this photograph. In China, they do everything very thoroughly, even the cleaning. And then I'm just back from Shanghai now, so I have to show you progress on the Opera House. Just with the library in Beijing, this is also a place for people. It's going to be much, much bigger than the roof in Oslo. I think it's about 4 times the size. We take the whole site that was available to us and wrap it up in one big fan to make the roof of the Opera House. Opera, dance, well, it's all about movement of people in space. And certainly this building gives you that movement, this spiraling, the opening at the fan that gives you not just the surface, like in Oslo, the surface that you walk on, but it also gives you the space, the volume that you walk underneath, where we put the theaters. There are 3 big theaters at this venue. And as I said, we take the whole site and make this one big gesture. There's one big fan that becomes the public space for the citizens of Shanghai. I'm pretty sure this is no exaggeration. When this building opens, there will be a lot of people there. Well, this is what it looks like today. You have to excuse me. I have quite a lot of pictures because I'm really excited about this place. It's just an amazing place to be, even if it's just a building site now. This is the spiral that they've now completed of the roof coming up. It's one huge cantilever. Before they completed the construction, it was a series of beams, and they hadn't filled in the joints between the beams, so you could stand on the end there and you could jump up and down and it would gently bounce with you. It's about a 20-meter cantilever. They've now stitched them all together, and you can't make it bounce, I'm happy to say. But it's really quite a phenomenal space. Get really excited just being there, just seeing these photographs again, and that sense of space that you move through and then move around. This is the entrance to the right, obviously the roof moving up, coming underneath it from the foyer, looking back out to the city. I don't think it's going to be so different to the renderings. It's going to be actually much, much better. Sun sets across the river in Puxi, and you get the sun flowing into the opera foyer itself. We got about 2 more years building in Shanghai. Recommend a trip. Then to change again the scale, I'll take you back to Norway. We talked a lot about walking on things, walking over things, walking through things, but also being under things. That's also part of this experience of architecture. And our little restaurant on the south coast of Norway that is actually called Under, because it's under the water. It's a place to eat your seafood dinner, your Michelin star seafood dinner, down with the fish itself. interesting project because the owner of the hotel wanted a seafood restaurant in the hotel. But gradually, as we started talking about the experience of this restaurant, what should it be, how should it feel like, we gradually moved closer and closer to the sea itself, to the seafood itself, and then obviously under the water to meet the fish themselves. So you can indeed sit here, eat the fish whilst you watch the fish swim by. But what is really beautiful about this place now is only 2 or 3 years after it was completed, is that the seabed, the seaweed, is taking it back, is taking over. The whole thing is now full of seaweed, marine life. It's a wonderful thing to see. They have to go down quite regularly to clean the window. But you can study marine life here. And this is the chef. You should meet the chef. He's gone down to fetch the seaweed. It's one of these small projects where you can design everything, from the tables to the chairs, to the plates, the knives, and the forks. Sometimes it's good to do that. We do graphic design. This is our logo. It's called Under, for obvious reasons. Web design, and the web page, which I think they're updating soon because, if nothing else, the prices have gone up. Yeah, this window is the window that goes down under the water. It starts at the top, goes under the water. Looking out of my hotel window this morning felt very much like I was in the Under restaurant, looking out into the rather murky waters. So since I'm sure you were going to ask me how it was built, now you don't need to ask me. Very quickly, some of the projects that I'm concerned in now, I've come straight from Tokyo yesterday afternoon. This building here in Shibuya is our first really large project in Japan. It's built for the Tokyo Corporation on the site of their very first department store in Shibuya. They're celebrating 120 years, and to do that, they're going to redefine their new department store, hotel, and service departments. Yes, it really is Mount Fuji in the background. That is where Mount Fuji is. It is very big. If you have a telephoto lens, it will look like that. So we're taking the energy of the street, the energy of Shibuya, where all the lights and the busy life is, wrapping that around the department store and then up into the tower with the residences and the hotel. It sits on the axis of the Bunkamura Dori, which comes from Shibuya, crossing down here at the bottom, up to what is the most fashionable area of Tokyo called Shoto, where all the people with lots of money live in small villas. So it's a little bit of a conflict between the rich people with the villas to the top and the busy life of Shibuya below. It sits as a landmark on the axis of the Munkamuradori, and the retail mall, the department store is the activator at the street level. We're going to clad it in ceramic tiles, porcelain that changes color as you grow up through the building and into the residential tower above. The podium will be a garden, a sanctuary, an oasis in this rather busy part of Tokyo. And then at the heart of the building is this retail mall, a little gallery on the top leading up to the gardens on the rooftop. But before I finish off, and I should be finishing any minute now, I see, I'm going to show you a little glimpse of what I think is the most exciting project that I'm working on at the moment, and is moving from making place for people to making place for stories. For people are stories. And I just love it when people tell stories about our buildings. That's when you know that you've met something. In Alexandria, there are hundreds of stories about why the library looks the way it does. Oh, it's the sun god, Ra, or it's the rising moon, or it's a microchip in grand scale. It's great when people have stories, always new stories. But this building is a place for stories, a museum for stories. It's not a museum. It's in Belfast, and it's called Belfast Stories. It's a competition we've just recently won. And what they're trying to do, what's the big idea, is to gather all the stories from all the people in Belfast, both old, new, and future stories in one place. It's audio, it's visual, there won't be any things or objects in this museum, only stories. I think it's a fantastic content, and I'm so happy that we have this project to work on. I could read out all this text, and it really brings tears to my eyes, but they're stories that are going to be told by the people of Belfast, their history, their past, and their future. Time is running out. We're doing our story. It's in the interesting place, Belfast. It's a very urban place, but everywhere in Belfast you can always see the mountains to the south or to the north. Very nice to work with an urban context that's changing, but the mountains, well, they're always the same. Thank you very much.